For 20 years they built their lives on stolen ground, blind to the ticking clock beneath their feet. Streets, parks, homes, all raised on a lie. But the lease has expired. And tonight the true heir returns with one mission: to take back everything they thought was theirs forever.
I never thought I'd come back to this place. Not like this, anyway. Last time I was anywhere near this patch of land, I was just a teenager with a skateboard, more interested in punk bands and coding forums than in property deeds. But 20 years is a long time. Long enough for people to forget who really owns what, and for parasites to convince themselves they've earned their place just by squatting long enough. My name is Lucas Bennett, and I own 1,500 acres of prime real estate just outside of Sacramento. Or at least, that's what the law says. If you'd asked me a month ago, I would have shrugged and told you it was technically mine, handed down from my grandfather, Walter Bennett. He signed the lease back in 2005, right before he passed. 20 years. That was the deal. The land was to be leased to a developer who would use it, not buy it, not claim it, not carve out their fantasy suburbia like it was their own goddamn birthright. Just rent it. But apparently, over those 2 decades, someone forgot to read the fine print. It all started with a letter. I was in New York, finalizing a software investment deal over burnt espresso when I got the notification from the trust's legal advisor. The lease was expiring in 30 days. The tenant, a homeowners association operating under the nauseatingly smug name Silver Pine Valley, had failed to contact anyone about renewal. No emails, no letters, not even a courtesy call. Just silence. So, I flew out. I didn't announce myself. I didn't drive onto the property with flashing lights or press releases. I rented a car, checked into a dingy roadside motel that reeked of pine cleaner and regret, and started walking the streets of what used to be rolling hills and walnut groves. Now, it was streets named after trees that never grew here. Bluebird Lane, Willow Crest Circle, Sugar Maple Drive. Every house looked like it had been stamped from the same suburban mold. Beige vinyl, overwatered lawns, tacky flagpoles, and plastic deer. The residents waved at me, assuming I was someone's visiting cousin or an Uber Eats driver. One lady offered me lemonade. Another gave me a passive-aggressive look for wearing boots instead of boat shoes. No one had the faintest clue that I wasn't just passing through. I was scouting, measuring, watching. They'd built parks, a community center, a members-only pool, even an elementary school, all on land that, legally speaking, hadn't been theirs in 2 decades. The HOA president, a woman named Karen Maynard, I swear I'm not making that up, was a local legend, I'd learned. Self-declared guardian of neighborhood values. She held monthly board meetings like they were military briefings, controlled who could paint their shutters what shade of white. God help you if your mailbox leaned. It was her kingdom, and she had no idea she was living in my house. I didn't say a word that first week. I met with a land surveyor, cross-checked records, confirmed the expiration date, and triple-checked it with my lawyer, Jamie Kim. She's sharp, calm in a way that makes other people nervous. The kind of calm that means someone's already buried you on page 12 of the lawsuit before you've even blinked. She confirmed, I had every legal right to reclaim the land. There was no renewal clause, no rollover, no purchase option. The only thing that kept these people here for 2 decades was the paper lease, and that paper had just turned to ash. I waited until the HOA's monthly meeting. They held it in a gaudy little community center shaped like a cottage, with overly aggressive air conditioning and cookies that tasted like dust. I walked in wearing a plain black jacket, holding a leather folder under my arm, nodding like a guest. Karen was mid-rant about someone parking an RV a full 4 inches into the no-parking zone. She had short, controlled blonde hair, a smirk like she knew your tax returns, and the tone of a woman who called the cops on lemonade stands. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward as she flipped to another color-coded page on the agenda. "Before we get too deep into HOA Regulation 13.7, I'd like to make an announcement." Karen's nostrils flared at the interruption, but before she could unleash whatever version of suburban wrath she had stored, I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "My name is Lucas Bennett. I'm the legal owner of all the land beneath your homes, streets, parks, and—" I looked down at the paper for dramatic effect. "This lovely community center. The 20-year lease your HOA operated under expired last week. As of today, none of you have legal occupancy here. This," I handed Karen a thick envelope, "is your formal eviction notice." The silence was exquisite. For a moment, even the HVAC shut up. Karen looked at me like I had grown antlers. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "You're mistaken," she said, voice as sharp as bleach. "These are privately owned homes. We have titles." "You have titles to buildings," I said, "not to the land. The lease never included transfer of land ownership. You've all been renting, whether you knew it or not." A balding man in a golf vest stood up, blustering. "This is outrageous! We've lived here for years. We've paid taxes." "So did the Romans when they occupied Gaul," I replied. "Didn't stop the barbarians." The room devolved into chaos. I let them yell, let them call me liar, crook, opportunist. I'd heard worse. Karen was already texting furiously, probably summoning a lawyer or an exorcist. But I didn't need their approval. I just needed their signatures. Or more accurately, their lack of them. And that was already in motion. As I stepped out into the parking lot, the sun dipped below the fake colonial rooftops, casting long shadows over their neatly manicured lawns. They thought they were untouchable, that no one would dare shake their perfect little world. They were wrong. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, my phone was vibrating non-stop with unknown numbers, blocked callers, and at least one voicemail that started with a deep breath and ended with a threat to see me in court and in hell. I ignored all of it. I already knew what panic sounded like when it was wrapped in entitlement. Silver Pine Valley went into full defensive mode. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting that same night, framing it as a crisis response session. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I could already predict the script. Denial first, outrage second, and manufactured confidence stitched together with half-remembered legal buzzwords. Instead, I walked the neighborhood again, this time slower, watching how the mood had shifted. Curtains twitched. Conversation stopped when I passed. That friendly suburb veneer cracked fast when people realized their sense of permanence was built on borrowed ground. By noon, Karen had gone public. A local news van parked near the community entrance, and there she was, framed perfectly in front of the Silver Pine Valley sign, delivering what I can only describe as a master class in suburban hysteria. She called me a land speculator, a bully, a heartless investor trying to displace families for profit. She said the HOA had always owned the land, and that any claim otherwise was either fraud or intimidation. It was impressive, in a way, how confidently she lied. What she didn't mention was that she'd never actually seen the original lease. That became obvious when Jamie and I started digging deeper. The lease my grandfather signed was clean, airtight, and painfully clear about its expiration. No auto-renewal, No implied continuation. No clause that could be twisted without snapping. Yet Silver Pine Valley had been operating for years as if ownership was a given. That kind of confidence doesn't come from ignorance alone. It comes from someone telling you what you want to hear. The first real crack appeared when an elderly resident named Holloway reached out to me. He'd lived there since the early development days, back when the roads were still gravel and the houses were only half sold. He asked to meet quietly, off the record. We sat on a park bench that technically belonged to me, though no one seemed to realize it yet. He told me he'd been an engineer before retirement and had helped review the initial land plans for the development. He remembered something that never sat right with him. The boundaries never changed, but the paperwork did. A few hours later, he emailed me scanned copies of early site maps. They matched my grandfather's records exactly. Every road, every park, every cul-de-sac was squarely inside the leased area. Even the school. Especially the school. Silver Pine Valley hadn't just built houses on my land, they'd built an entire municipal fantasy and pretended it was permanent. Meanwhile, the pressure campaign ramped up. Anonymous posts flooded local forums, painting me as some faceless corporate shark. Someone slipped a flyer under my motel door, accusing me of trying to erase a community. Another warned me to leave while I still could. Cute. What really caught my attention was the HOA's sudden legal pivot. They filed a preemptive claim asserting that the lease had been extended through continued use and community reliance. That phrase popped up everywhere, like a chant. Community reliance. It was legally meaningless, but emotionally effective. Jamie wasn't impressed. She explained calmly that reliance didn't override contract law, and sentiment didn't rewrite property rights. What did concern her was the speed. Karen was moving too fast, too confidently, as if she knew something I didn't. That's when we subpoenaed internal HOA records. What came back raised a very specific red flag. One member of the HOA board, a man named Ronald Green, had served as legal counsel during the later years of the lease. He was retired now, still respected, still influential. His signature appeared on several internal memos reassuring the board that lease expiration concerns were resolved years ago. No documentation attached. Just his word, and everyone accepted it. Jamie leaned back in her chair after reading that. Someone either committed malpractice, she said, or fraud. Before we could push further, things escalated again. HOA security started showing up wherever I parked, not officially confronting me, just standing there, arms crossed, staring a little too long. One night, my motel room was tossed. Nothing stolen, just my files disturbed. A message without words. That was the moment the tone changed. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was obstruction, intimidation, and it was sloppy. Jamie drafted the expanded complaint that night, not just against the HOA, but against Karen personally, against the board, and against their contracted security firm. We weren't waiting anymore. If they wanted a fight, they'd picked the worst possible terrain. By the time I went to sleep, Silver Pine Valley was no longer just defending itself. It was cornered. I wasn't exactly shocked when the physical threats began. Disappointed, maybe. Karen struck me as many things: vindictive, arrogant, obsessed with power, but not reckless. Turns out, I gave her too much credit. It was the third night after we filed our expanded complaint. I'd just returned from Jamie's office, where we'd finished reviewing deposition schedules and subpoena requests. I was tired, hungry, and halfway through microwaving a burrito that tasted like scorched cardboard when I heard the knock on my motel door. It wasn't polite. 3 rapid thuds. Not the kind of knock you hear from reception or room service. The kind that says, "Open this door, or I will." I didn't open it. Instead, I stepped quietly to the side, checked the peephole. Two men stood outside. One was tall, maybe 6'3", wearing a zip-up hoodie that did nothing to hide the bulk underneath. The other was shorter but stocky, bald with a neck like a fire hydrant. Neither looked like they were there to talk about property law. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and started recording. Then I spoke, calmly, just loud enough to be heard. "You've got the wrong door." The big one chuckled. "We know exactly whose door this is." They started banging again, louder this time. The tall one said, "We're here with a message. You got your little lawsuit going, but here's the thing. You push this any further, people get hurt." I couldn't help it. I laughed, short, sharp, pissed off. "You think this is going to scare me?" I heard the lock jiggle. That's when I moved. I slipped out the side window. Thankfully, I was on the ground floor and came around the building fast. The parking lot was mostly empty, but I spotted my rental car and made a beeline for it. I wasn't going to play hero. I was going to get the hell out of there, call the cops, and let Jamie unleash legal hell. But of course, they saw me. I'd barely gotten the door open when the short one spotted me. "Hey!" They ran. I got in the car, slammed the door, and locked it. But the tall one reached me before I could start the engine. He yanked the door handle, locked, and then punched the window. It didn't shatter, but the sound was enough to spike my adrenaline. I threw the car into reverse, floored it, nearly clipped the motel sign, then peeled out of the lot and into the street, tires screeching like a cliché action movie. I called the police the moment I hit the first traffic light. 2 patrol cars met me back at the motel. The officers were polite, serious, and, most importantly, familiar with Silver Pine Valley's security firm. I didn't have to explain much. The motel's cameras caught everything. Within an hour, the 2 men were identified. Contractors who worked for the HOA's off-book neighborhood patrol. Not licensed security. Not even registered. Just hired muscle with loose ends and shorter tempers. The next day, Jamie filed for an emergency injunction and amended the civil suit to include criminal conspiracy, intimidation, and attempted assault. She didn't even raise her voice when she did it. Just highlighted the security footage with timestamps, printed out the security contracts from Silver Pine Valley, and attached them to the complaint like she was organizing a PTA fundraiser. The court responded faster than I expected. We were granted expedited discovery and a temporary restraining order against the HOA engaging in any direct or indirect contact with the plaintiff. Karen couldn't even post about me on Nextdoor without risking contempt. That should have been enough, right? Except it wasn't. Because the deeper we looked, the more the rot showed. Jamie's team uncovered internal HOA emails between Karen and Ronald Green, the retired board member who used to be their in-house legal advisor. One message, dated 3 months before the lease expiration, read, "Just in case the Bennett kid resurfaces, make sure we're using the version without the termination date. The one from 2009. I'll reformat and clean it. No need to panic the board." Attached was a document titled Final Lease Clean. It had all the trimmings of a real lease, letterhead, watermark, even a notary stamp. Only the expiration clause was missing. When we confronted Karen's lawyer with it, he looked like he'd just bitten into a lemon and found a nail inside. 2 hours later, he called Jamie privately and tried to propose a sealed settlement. She declined. Politely. We weren't sealing anything. Holloway, the old engineer, agreed to testify that the original boundary plans matched my grandfather's lease terms. The forged lease would be compared side by side to the real one. And Ronald Green? We'd already filed to have him deposed under oath. By now, half the neighborhood was watching everything unfold like it was a Netflix docuseries. Rumors swirled. Some believed me. Others clung to Karen's version, painting her as a misunderstood protector of community values. But the attack had changed everything. Whatever illusion of moral high ground the HOA thought they had, it evaporated the moment they sent 2 thugs to my door. This wasn't just property anymore. It was war. The courtroom didn't look like much. Just another beige government building, the kind with flickering lights and chairs that punish your spine for sitting in them. But as I stepped through those doors, past rows of spectators and into the gallery, it felt like stepping onto a stage where the performance was real, the stakes enormous, and the actors deadly serious. Silver Pine Valley HOA versus Lucas Bennett. It had an official ring to it now. My name printed across dockets, filings, hearing schedules. The media had picked it up, of course. Nothing like a suburban empire built on fraud and plastic fences crumbling under legal fire to get the morning news excited. One outlet ran the headline, "The Landlord Strikes Back." Another went with, "Community Built on Lies?" I preferred the first one. It had a little punch. Karen was already seated when I arrived, flanked by her legal team. She wore a navy blue blazer that probably cost more than most of her neighbors' mortgages, and a smug expression so practiced it might have been surgically installed. But I noticed the tight grip on her pen, the way her lawyer leaned in a little too close when he whispered in her ear. She was nervous. Good. Jamie sat beside me, calm as ever, tapping through her notes on a tablet while sipping coffee like it was any other Tuesday. She whispered, "Don't react unless I tell you to. You're not here to win points. You're here to win the war." The judge entered, a man in his 60s with tired eyes and no time for bullshit. He wasted none of it. Opening statements were short. The HOA's lawyer tried to paint me as an opportunist, exploiting a loophole in old paperwork. He leaned heavily on community reliance, that empty mantra they'd latched onto like a life raft. According to him, the families had built lives, identities, and equity here, and I was threatening to upend a thriving neighborhood for personal gain. Then it was Jamie's turn. She stood, took a step forward, and said, "This isn't a case about community. It's about contract. A contract your clients violated, manipulated, and then tried to bury." She tapped the binder on the table beside her. "We have the original lease, the forged version, the emails coordinating the forgery, and a witness who helped draft the original plans. My client is not removing anyone unlawfully. He's taking back what's his after patiently waiting 20 years. No dramatic flourishes, no overreaching, just facts, hard, sharp, and perfectly aimed." Then came the evidence. We started with the original lease. Notarized, signed, time-stamped. The expiration clause was right there, in black ink. "The lease shall terminate in full on the last day of April, 2025. No automatic renewal shall apply." The court clerk entered the second document, the final lease clean, same format, same signature. But the expiration clause? Gone. The air in the room changed. Then Jamie dropped the hammer, printed email chains between Karen and Ronald Green. "We'll use the version without the expiration. Reformat it. Keep the board calm." The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Maynard, is this your email?" Karen shifted in her seat. Her lawyer objected on technical grounds. Overruled. "Yes," she said eventually. But context matters. It didn't. Then Ronald Green took the stand. He looked smaller than I expected, thinned out with age, eyes flicking around like a man hoping for an escape hatch. He tried to dodge, to spin, claimed it was a clerical error. But Jamie pressed him, calmly, methodically, until he cracked. He admitted to removing the expiration clause from the lease copy presented to the board. Claimed Karen asked him to just simplify things. Claimed he didn't realize it would be used to defraud residents. Sure. He'd already agreed to a plea deal with the DA. Reduced charges for full cooperation. His testimony was the price. Then Holloway took the stand. He brought with him site plans, original land surveys, copies of the zoning records from the mid-2000s. He confirmed that every square inch of Silver Pine Valley was on Bennett land. No ambiguities, no edge cases. When asked directly, he said, "They built a city on borrowed land, and when it was time to give it back, they chose to lie instead." After that, Jamie presented the security footage from my motel, the attempted assault, the threats, the contracts linking the two men to a third-party firm hired by the HOA. Karen's name was on the payment authorizations. That's when the judge stopped everything. He recessed the court for an hour, then returned with a preliminary ruling. The court finds substantial evidence of fraud, document falsification, harassment, and malicious interference with legal proceedings. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease all counter-litigation. Furthermore, a temporary enforcement order will be issued, recognizing Mr. Bennett's ownership and granting him the authority to determine occupancy arrangements until final judgment is rendered. Karen's face twisted like someone had thrown acid in her coffee. Her lawyer looked like he was silently updating his resume. But that wasn't all. The judge continued, citing precedent and contract law, that we had grounds for damages. Jamie requested compensation for unpaid land use, pain and suffering, legal fees, and punitive damages related to the attempted intimidation. The amount? $12.4 million. I didn't flinch. Neither did Jamie. The judge didn't grant it. Yet. But he acknowledged the figure as within reason, based on the preliminary evidence. The trial would proceed. Depositions, testimonies, and full review of property rights and occupancy agreements. But the message was clear. We weren't speculators. We were owners. And now the court was listening. The verdict hadn't even cooled on the judge's tongue before Silver Pine Valley began tearing itself apart. I could feel it in the air the moment I drove back through the gates. No more waves from elderly dog walkers. No more passive-aggressive smiles from yoga moms. Just silence. Thick, brittle silence. The kind that builds when people realize the kingdom they built on sand is collapsing. And no one remembered to bring life vests. The community forum exploded first. Karen's supporters doubled down, calling the ruling a temporary setback and blaming the East Coast investor, that's me, for manipulating the courts. They even suggested Jamie was part of a coastal elite conspiracy. I had to laugh. If they knew Jamie, they'd know she has the patience of a python and the tolerance of a judge at traffic court. But not everyone bought the spin. Some residents began asking questions, publicly. Why had they never seen the original lease? Why hadn't the board disclosed that the land was never purchased? Why did Karen send neighborhood security after a guy with a legal claim and a laptop? Doubt spread like wildfire. And like all fires in HOA land, it started with a barbecue. One night, I was driving past a cul-de-sac when I saw a crowd gathered around a folding table loaded with foil trays and lukewarm ribs. They weren't wearing HOA name tags, no clipboards, no printed agendas. Just tired, pissed-off neighbors trying to make sense of how they'd ended up living in houses built on a lie. I stopped, stepped out, and approached slowly, expecting glares, maybe a few words thrown like darts. Instead, one of the older men, maybe mid-60s, raised a beer can and said, "Well, if it ain't the landlord." They laughed. I stayed. We talked for over an hour about how their mortgage lenders never explained the land situation, about how their HOA fees had increased year after year, and somehow nothing ever improved, about how Karen ruled like a queen but disappeared the moment the legal bills came due. Some of them asked bluntly if I was planning to bulldoze everything. I told them the truth. I didn't want to destroy their homes. I wanted what was mine: respect, justice, and a return to legal reality. I'd waited 20 years. I wasn't the villain. I was the reckoning they never thought would show up with a folder and a lawyer. That's when the idea came. Jamie helped me draft it. An offer. Residents could either enter into new land lease agreements with me directly, updated to modern terms, renewable every 10 years. Purchase the land under their homes at a reduced market rate, not a gift, but a fair exit route. Or walk away and let the bank figure it out. It wasn't charity. It was cleanup, and it came with a ticking clock. 60 days. That's what the judge gave them. 60 days to vacate illegal properties, or formal enforcement would begin. Eviction orders, property seizures, real consequences. Karen tried to rally resistance, calling my offer extortion with a smile. But her credibility was shot. The fraud ruling, the security footage, the forged lease, it had gutted her authority. And it didn't help that her own house sat on the very plot my grandfather had marked non-developable. Technically, it had been illegally built from day one. Within the first week, over 40% of residents reached out to sign lease agreements. Another 20% requested purchase estimates. The rest? They clung to denial like it would save them. Some fled, dumped their homes for whatever they could get, left lawn furniture behind like ghosts in reverse. Then came the symbolic moment I didn't even plan for. Karen's house went up for public auction. She tried to stop it, claimed it was a mistake, that her attorney was filing something to delay the sale. But the order was final. She didn't own the land. She didn't own the house. She just occupied it under the weight of arrogance and expired lies. Jamie and I bought it at auction for a fraction of what it was worth on Zillow. Cash. No fanfare. Just a transaction. 2 weeks later, I opened the doors to the former Queen's Castle as a transitional assistance center, a place where remaining residents could meet with real estate consultants, get legal advice, apply for relocation assistance. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. From eviction notice to welcome desk, one guy muttered as he filled out a form. I just smiled. The transformation was starting, not just of the land, but of the people. When you yank the blindfold off a neighborhood, some fall apart, others rebuild. The ones who stayed, stayed because they could accept the truth. The ones who didn't? Well, I wouldn't be mailing them Christmas cards. The last 30 days were like watching a parade of delusion crash into a brick wall of reality. And I had front row seats. After the auction of Karen's house, everything accelerated. She disappeared from public view for a while. No more statements, no interviews, no rants on community forums. I heard she'd tried to file an appeal, but it was dead on arrival. There's only so much you can do once you've been caught forging legal documents and authorizing attacks on people. Her lawyer quietly dropped her. She retained someone new, a desperate TV commercial type whose specialty was mostly DUI cases. It didn't help. What remained of the HOA board tried to hold things together, but they were bleeding credibility. 2 board members resigned, one citing personal stress, another citing acute moral discomfort, which was a long-winded way of saying, I didn't know Karen was committing crimes. Please don't sue me. They scheduled an emergency community referendum, which no one attended. No one cared. The HOA had become a joke, a burned-out husk of a paper empire built on aggressive landscaping and passive-aggressive newsletters. Meanwhile, Jamie and I finalized the damages claim. With Karen and Ronald fully exposed, we added claims of, civil conspiracy, wire fraud, and willful misrepresentation. Every resident who signed a lease under false assumptions became part of the evidence. Our team compiled spreadsheets, timelines, internal memos, the works. It looked less like a lawsuit and more like a war crime tribunal. The final amount requested? $12.4 million, plus punitive damages, court costs, and interest stretching back 2 decades. Jamie said we might not get the full ask, but we'd get close. And more importantly, we'd set precedent. Not just for us, but for every HOA in the country playing fast and loose with land use law. Then came the final hearing. The courtroom was packed, not just with residents, but with reporters, real estate lawyers, and probably a few vultures pretending to be concerned citizens. Karen was there too, gaunt and gray around the edges. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, or maybe hadn't had a plan in longer. She tried to smirk when I entered. It looked more like a spasm. The judge reviewed the evidence again, quietly, efficiently. No room for theatrics this time. Jamie submitted the final audit, a full breakdown of profits the HOA had collected while squatting illegally. It wasn't just about rent. It was about enrichment. They'd built amenities, charged fees, collected interest, all while occupying land they had no right to control. Karen's lawyer tried a last-ditch defense. She acted on bad advice. The board misled her. She was a figurehead, not a decision-maker. The judge didn't even blink. When the ruling came, it hit like a hammer. Ronald Green, found guilty of willful document falsification, civil fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, ordered to pay damages and barred from practicing or advising in any legal capacity ever again. Karen Maynard, personally liable for civil fraud, harassment, illegal enrichment, and abuse of power, ordered to pay $3,200,000 in personal damages, plus full forfeiture of any property held within Silver Pine Valley. Permanent restraining order issued. She could no longer hold any office in any HOA in California. Ever. Silver Pine Valley. HOA. Dissolved by court order. Assets frozen, pending liquidation and redistribution under the supervision of a state-appointed auditor. Lucas Bennett. Declared full legal owner of all land previously leased, with court-sanctioned authority to negotiate new leases, sales, or redevelopment. As the judge finished reading the decision, Karen stood. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Apologize, maybe. But instead, she muttered something under her breath and walked out. No eye contact, no final word. Just the quiet exit of a woman who'd finally run out of mirrors to lie to. Outside the courthouse, I gave a short statement to the press. Jamie stood next to me, silent as always, arms crossed like a general in dress uniform. I didn't come back here looking for a fight, I said. I came to honor my grandfather's legacy, to uphold the law, to remind people that contracts matter. That land isn't something you take. It's something you respect. The reporters shouted follow-up questions. What would happen to the homes, the residents, the future of the neighborhood? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, we were just getting started. I didn't demolish the neighborhood. That's what everyone thought I'd do. Turn it into luxury condos, pave the parks for parking lots, Maybe install a 24-hour drive-through casino just to rub it in. Hell, even Jamie half-joked about calling a demolition crew the day after the ruling. But I didn't, because beneath the lies and fraud and HOA hellscape, it was still my grandfather's land, and there was still something worth saving. So, I made a plan. A real one. The first step? I converted the old HOA office, the place where Karen once barked orders about lawn height and mailbox fonts, into a community resource center. We stripped it of its smug wallpaper and petty rules, repainted it in warm earth tones, and filled it with folding chairs, legal forms, and free coffee that didn't taste like burnt asphalt. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Jamie hosted open Q&As with residents about lease options, legal rights, and how to sue the former board members if they felt like it. The second step? I brought in planners, not developers, not vultures in hard hats. Actual community planners. People who asked the residents what they wanted, not what could be squeezed into a profit margin. We held town halls, actual ones, no timers, no 2 minutes then sit down bullshit. Just real people, talking about real dreams. Some wanted better parks. Some wanted solar panels. One retired teacher wanted a community garden and wound up running it within 3 weeks. And me? I moved into Karen's old house. Not because I needed the space. Trust me, I didn't. But because I wanted to prove a point. The house wasn't cursed. The land wasn't poisoned. The neighborhood didn't have to die. It just had to be rebuilt. Without corruption, without false power, and definitely without a woman who once tried to evict a single mother for painting her shutters unauthorized lavender. I kept the shutters. Lavender's grown on me. About 2 months after the final ruling, we held a block party. Not some PR stunt, a real one. Bounce house for the kids. Local band playing awful covers of better songs. Tables of homemade food, cheap beer, and more laughter than I thought this place had left in it. Jamie even showed up, though she refused to dance, said she didn't settle cases with her hips. Midway through the evening, someone handed me a microphone. "Speech! Speech!" a few yelled. I hated public speaking, still do. But I looked around, at the people rebuilding, at the lights strung across the trees, at the kids playing in the grass that was once battleground turf. And I figured, why not? I tapped the mic. 20 years ago, this place didn't exist, I said. It was just dirt and dreams. Then it became houses. Then it became a lie. Now, maybe it gets to become something better. There was a pause. Then someone in the back yelled, "Even with those lavender shutters?" Laughter. I shrugged, especially with those. The sun dipped below the rooftops. Someone lit sparklers. A toddler ran around pretending to be a fire-breathing dragon. And I stood there, in the middle of a street that used to be stolen, on land that was finally back where it belonged. No more fraud. No more threats. No more Karen. Just 1,500 acres of second chances.
At its core, this story is about ownership, not just of land, but of truth, legacy, and justice. Lucas Bennett doesn't just reclaim real estate, he dismantles an entire illusion propped up by arrogance, manipulation, and suburban denial. For 20 years, the residents of Silver Pine Valley lived on land they never owned. But they never questioned it, because who questions comfort? Who checks paperwork when the lawns are trimmed and the HOA newsletter arrives on time? The real villain here isn't just Karen Maynard, the power-hungry HOA president. It's the culture of unquestioned permanence. Ask yourself, would you ever think to double-check if your home was legally built on land your HOA didn't own? Karen's downfall wasn't sudden, it was systemic. Her entire regime was based on fraud dressed up as order, confidence without evidence, the forged lease, the aggressive security, the smear campaigns. These weren't leadership tactics, they were fear responses. Power built on fraud must always double down to survive. And then there's Lucas, the ultimate anti-hero in a black jacket, with a folder full of facts and a lawyer who doesn't blink. He doesn't seek vengeance. He seeks rectification. No theatrics, just consequences. When threatened, he documents. When attacked, he escalates, legally. When lied to, he responds with truth so sharp it cuts through courtroom silence. But what about the residents? Were they victims of Karen's manipulation or willing participants in a comfortable lie? At what point does ignorance become complicity? When does "I didn't know" stop being a defense? The brilliance of this story is that it doesn't end in destruction, but it ends in reclamation and reconstruction. Lucas could have bulldozed the community out of spite. Instead, he offered new leases, fair deals, second chances. What would you have done in his place? Punished or rebuilt? This story teaches us that justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. Ownership without truth is fiction. Power without accountability is rot. And silence in the face of lies isn't peace, it's permission.